While I was at work, my wife moved my mother's stuff to the basement, claiming, "Her sisters deserves the best rooms." When I got home and saw my mother sad, I just smiled and said, "Pack your bags." My wife and her sisters had no idea what was coming. So here's the thing about good intentions. They're like those fancy gym memberships you buy in January. They sound absolutely brilliant when you're signing up, but fast forward 6 months, and you're wondering what the hell you were thinking while you're eating pizza in your underwear at 2 a.m. My name's Jordan Ellis, and I'm about to tell you a story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. I'm 36, married to a woman named Alina who I thought was my ride or die, and I'm the only kid my mom Gloria ever managed to keep from driving her completely insane. Trust me, that's saying something because I was a real piece of work growing up. The kind of kid who thought putting firecrackers in mailboxes counted as a science experiment. But life has this funny way of smacking you upside the head when you least expect it. One Tuesday morning, I'm drinking my coffee and scrolling through the same mindless social media garbage everyone else is addicted to when my phone rings. It's Mom, and she's crying. Not the gentle, "I just watched a Hallmark movie" crying, but the deep, gut-wrenching sobs that make your stomach drop faster than a lead balloon. Dad was gone. Heart attack at 68, right there in the grocery store checkout line. The irony? He was buying those stupid heart-healthy frozen dinners Mom had been nagging him to try for months. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor that would make a stand-up comedian jealous. After the funeral, which was about as fun as a root canal performed by a drunk dentist, I knew what had to happen. Mom couldn't stay in that big house alone. She'd rattle around in there like a marble in a coffee can, surrounded by 40 years of memories and Dad's ridiculous collection of fishing magazines he swore he was going to read someday. The woman was 63 and had never lived alone a single day in her life. She went from her parents' house to married life faster than you could say shotgun wedding, though in her case, it was more like head over heels in love wedding. So I did what any decent son would do. I loaded up my pickup truck with her most important stuff: family photos, her ancient sewing machine that sounded like a dying helicopter, and approximately 17,000 books because apparently my mother thought she was running a mobile library. The plan was simple, and I mean kindergarten-level simple. Mom moves in with Alina and me temporarily, just until she gets her bearings and I can help her find a nice little place nearby. Maybe one of those cute senior communities where she could play bingo and complain about young people with others her age. Just until we get on our feet, I told Alina as we set up the guest room. And bless her heart, she nodded and smiled like she genuinely meant it. "Of course, baby," she said, arranging the throw pillows on the bed with the kind of precision that would make a military drill sergeant weep with pride. "Family takes care of family. Your mom's been through hell, and we're going to help her through this." I swear, in that moment, I could have married her all over again. Here was my wife, stepping up to the plate like some kind of domestic superhero, ready to welcome my grieving mother into our home without so much as a raised eyebrow. We felt like a team, you know? Like one of those power couples in movies who face adversity together and come out stronger on the other side, probably while some inspiring soundtrack plays in the background. Mom, God love her, was the perfect house guest those first few weeks. She'd wake up early and have coffee ready before either of us even thought about opening our eyes. She'd cook these incredible dinners that made our usual diet of takeout Chinese and frozen pizza look like we'd been living like college freshmen our entire adult lives. The woman could make a shoe taste like Thanksgiving dinner if you gave her 5 minutes and access to her spice cabinet. She never complained, never got in the way, and always asked if it was okay before she did anything. "Jordan, is it all right if I do a load of laundry?" Or, "Alina, honey, do you mind if I use the kitchen to bake some cookies?" It was almost heartbreaking how careful she was being, like she was afraid we'd suddenly realize what a burden she was and kick her to the curb. But here's where the story takes a left turn that would make NASCAR drivers dizzy. Things started changing, and I don't mean the good kind of change like finally getting a decent haircut or discovering you actually look okay in skinny jeans. I'm talking about the sneaky, gradual kind of change that creeps up on you like weight gain during the holidays. You don't notice it happening until suddenly your pants don't fit and you're wondering where the hell your life went wrong. At first, it was little things. Alina would get this tiny wrinkle between her eyebrows when Mom offered to help with dinner. She'd smile and say everything was fine, but it was that tight, fake smile people use when they're trying not to lose their shit in public. You know the one. It's the same expression people wear when their boss asks them to work overtime on a Friday evening. Then came the comments. Nothing outright mean, mind you, because Alina was way too smart to play her hand that obviously. But little passive-aggressive gems like, "Oh, mom made dinner again. That's so sweet, but you know I had plans to cook tonight." Or my personal favorite, "I love how comfortable your mom is here. It's like she's never planning to leave." Delivered with a laugh that had all the warmth of a January morning in Alaska. I should have seen the warning signs flashing like a neon beer sign in a dive bar window. But you know how it is when you're trying to balance keeping your wife happy and taking care of your grieving mother. It's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle. You're so focused on not dropping anything that you don't notice you're heading straight for a cliff. It's just temporary. I kept telling myself, like some kind of mantra, just until mom gets back on her feet. Just until she's ready to be on her own again. Just until everything goes back to normal. But here's the thing about normal. Sometimes it's gone for good, and you don't realize it until you're standing in the wreckage, wondering what the hell just happened. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the protagonist decides to go investigate that weird noise in the basement at midnight? You're sitting there screaming at the TV, "Don't do it, you absolute moron." Well, turns out I was that moron. Except instead of a creepy basement, I was about to get ambushed by my wife's family drama. And instead of a chainsaw-wielding maniac, I was dealing with something far more terrifying. Two grown women who thought the world owed them a living. It was a Thursday evening, about 3 weeks after mom had settled into what I foolishly thought was our temporary new normal. I was coming home from another soul-crushing day at the warehouse, where I spent 8 hours loading boxes and wondering if this was really what my college guidance counselor meant when she said I had unlimited potential. The house smelled amazing. Mom had made her famous pot roast, the kind that could probably solve world peace if we just served it at the United Nations. I walked into the kitchen expecting to grab a beer and maybe catch the game highlights. But instead I found Alina pacing around like a caged tiger who'd had too much espresso. She had that look on her face. You married folks know the one I'm talking about. It's the expression that says, "I'm about to drop some news on you that's going to make you question every life choice you've ever made." "Hey babe," she said, and I immediately knew I was screwed because she only called me babe when she was buttering me up for something big. It's like when car salesmen start talking about being your friend. Run for the hills, brother. "What's up?" I asked, already mentally preparing myself for whatever fresh hell was about to rain down on my relatively peaceful existence. "So, I got a call from Bianca today," she started, and my heart sank faster than the Titanic. Bianca was Alina's younger sister, and to say she had a flair for the dramatic would be like saying the Grand Canyon was a pretty big hole in the ground. This woman could turn ordering coffee into a 3-act tragedy with a subplot about her childhood trauma. "She's getting divorced," Alina continued, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. Bianca went through relationships like most people go through toilet paper, quickly and with a lot of mess left behind. Her husband Derek was actually a decent guy, but he'd made the fatal mistake of expecting Bianca to contribute something to their household besides complaints and Instagram posts about how hard her life was. "That sucks," I said, trying to sound sympathetic while secretly thinking that Derek was probably popping champagne somewhere. "But what does that have to do with us?" And there it was, the pause. You know the one. It's the same pause you get right before the dentist tells you that you need a root canal, or when your boss calls you into their office for a quick chat that ends with you updating your LinkedIn profile. "Well," Alina said, suddenly very interested in rearranging the salt and pepper shakers, "she needs somewhere to stay while she gets back on her feet. Just temporarily, of course." I felt my eyes start to twitch. Define temporarily. A few weeks, maybe a couple months at most. And here's the thing, Talia called too. Oh, for the love of all that is holy. Talia was the baby sister, 28 years old and still figuring out what she wanted to do with her life, which apparently involved changing career paths more often than some people change their underwear. Last I heard, she'd quit her job at the marketing firm because her boss didn't appreciate her creative vision. Before that, it was the yoga studio because the environment was too toxic. And before that, it was the coffee shop because making lattes was beneath her artistic soul. "Let me guess," I said, setting down my beer with the resignation of a man who could see the writing on the wall, even if it was written in crayon by a drunk monkey. She's burned out and needs to reset her life? Alina's face lit up like I'd just solved world hunger. Exactly. You get it. She just needs some space to figure things out, maybe do some soul searching. You know how sensitive she is. Sensitive. Right. Talia was about as sensitive as a bulldozer in a china shop. The woman once threw a tantrum at a restaurant because they served her latte in the wrong color mug. Apparently, white mugs gave her bad energy, and she needed earth tones to maintain her chakra alignment or some other new age nonsense she'd picked up from whatever self-help guru she was following that week. So let me get this straight, I said, because sometimes you need to hear the crazy out loud to fully appreciate just how deep in it you are. Both your sisters need to move in with us, while my mom is already here, in our 3-bedroom house. It's perfect timing, Alina exclaimed, and I swear she actually clapped her hands together like she was announcing a surprise birthday party. We have those 2 spare rooms upstairs, right next to your mom's room. It'll be like having the whole family together. And there it was. The moment when I should have put my foot down harder than a country line dancer. The moment when I should have channeled my inner dad and said, absolutely not. This is insane. And if you think I'm turning our home into a halfway house for your emotionally unstable siblings, you've got another think coming. But did I do that? Hell no. Because I'm an idiot who still believed in concepts like family helping family and marriage being a partnership. I was like one of those optimistic pioneers heading west in a covered wagon, completely oblivious to the fact that I was about to get scalped by reality. I don't love the idea, I said, which in married guy speak translates to this is a terrible idea that's going to ruin our lives, but I'm too tired to fight about it right now. It's just temporary, Alina assured me, using the same tone people use when they say things like, this won't hurt a bit, right before they stab you with a needle. Family helps family, right? And there was the kicker. Family helps family. It sounded so reasonable, so noble, so completely logical that you'd have to be a heartless monster to argue with it. The problem was, I didn't realize at the time that in Alina's definition of family, some members were apparently more equal than others. I didn't know that my mom, the woman who had raised me, loved me unconditionally and was currently grieving the loss of her life partner, didn't quite make the cut when it came to who deserved respect and consideration in this new arrangement. But I was about to find out. If you've never watched a slow-motion car crash happen right in your own living room, let me paint you a picture. It starts small, maybe a fender bender that everyone pretends didn't happen. Then gradually, over the course of weeks, it turns into a full-scale demolition derby where everyone's smiling and acting like the flames shooting out of the engine are just mood lighting. The first week after Bianca and Talia moved in was like that awkward honeymoon period you get with new roommates. Everyone's on their best behavior, saying please and thank you, like we're all characters in some wholesome family sitcom. Bianca kept thanking us for opening our home to her, while dramatically sighing about how Derek just couldn't handle a strong, independent woman. Talia spent most of her time setting up what she called her sacred creative space in the living room, which apparently required more crystals than a new age gift shop and enough essential oils to knock out a small elephant. Mom, bless her heart, handled it all with the grace of a diplomat at a peace summit. She welcomed the girls like they were long-lost relatives, cooked enough food to feed a small army, and even offered to help Talia with her job hunt. I watched my mother, this woman who was still processing the loss of her husband of 40 years, bend over backwards to make my wife's sisters feel at home. She gave up her favorite spot on the couch, rearranged her schedule around their needs, and never once complained when Talia's morning meditation sessions involved chanting at volumes that could wake the dead. But here's the thing about respect. It's like a muscle. If you don't exercise it regularly, it starts to atrophy, and before you know it, you're dealing with people who wouldn't recognize common courtesy if it walked up and introduced itself with a firm handshake. It started with the little things. I'd come home from work to find Mom quietly cleaning up messes that weren't hers. Bianca's wine glasses left on every surface like she was marking her territory. Talia's art supplies scattered across the dining room table like a craft store had exploded. When I asked Mom about it, she'd just shrug and say, "Oh, they're going through a hard time, honey. It's no trouble. No trouble. Right." because apparently my 63-year-old mother had nothing better to do than clean up after two grown women who acted like the maid's service was included in their rent. Then came the kitchen situation. Now, I'm not Gordon Ramsay or anything, but I know good cooking when I taste it. Mom's pot roast could make a vegetarian question their life choices, and her apple pie was the stuff of neighborhood legend. But suddenly, I started overhearing conversations that made my blood pressure spike faster than a caffeinated cheetah. I mean, it's sweet that she tries. Bianca would whisper to Talia while they thought Mom was out of earshot. But everything she makes is so heavy. All that butter and salt. Doesn't she know we're watching our figures? This from a woman who I'd personally seen demolish an entire sleeve of Oreos while complaining about how unfair life was. But sure, Bianca, Mom's home-cooked meals are the problem here. Talia, not to be outdone in the passive-aggressive Olympics, had her own contributions. I'm just saying, she'd announced to no one in particular. The energy in the kitchen feels really chaotic when there are too many people cooking. I need harmony in my food preparation space to maintain my spiritual balance. Your spiritual balance. Lady, you've been unemployed for 6 months and you're living rent-free in someone else's house. Maybe worry less about your chakras and more about your checking account. But the real kicker, the moment I should have seen the writing on the wall in giant, neon letters, was when I came home one Thursday to find something that made my jaw hit the floor harder than a dropped anvil. My dad's photo was gone. For 40 years, there had been a framed picture of my parents on their wedding day sitting on the mantel in our living room. It was one of the first things Mom had brought when she moved in. This beautiful black and white photo of them looking at each other like they'd just discovered the secret to happiness. Dad was in his army dress uniform, looking proud and nervous and about 17 years old, while Mom was in this simple white dress that made her look like a movie star from the 1950s. That photo was now buried somewhere upstairs, replaced by a glossy snapshot of Alina, Bianca, and Talia from some beach vacation they'd taken the year before. 3 women in matching sunglasses, holding fruity drinks and grinning at the camera like they owned the world. I stood there staring at it for a solid minute, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just redecorating. This was erasure. This was someone deciding that my father's memory, my mother's grief, and 40 years of marriage was less important than a vacation selfie. When I asked Mom about it later, I found her in the kitchen making tea with hands that shook slightly as she poured the hot water. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she gave me that brave smile she'd been perfecting since Dad died. Oh, Talia needed the space for her vision board. She said quietly, like that explained everything. She's working on manifesting her ideal career path, and she said having old energy around was blocking her flow. I didn't want to cause a scene. My mother, who had buried her husband 3 months ago, who was living in a house where she was treated like an unwelcome guest, who was watching her deceased husband's memory get shoved aside for someone's vision board nonsense, didn't want to cause a scene. I felt something shift inside me that night, something fundamental and irreversible. It was like watching someone kick a dog and suddenly realizing that all those people standing around saying, "It's not that bad," are part of the problem. Because here's the truth that took me way too long to figure out. Disrespect isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, and wrapped in excuses that sound almost reasonable if you don't look too close. Sometimes it's taking someone's grief and telling them to keep it to themselves because it makes other people uncomfortable. Sometimes it's deciding that the person who's helping everyone deserves the least consideration. I should have done something right then. Should have marched upstairs, grabbed that beach photo, and thrown it in the trash where it belonged. Should have told Talia and Bianca that if they didn't like the energy in our house, they were welcome to find somewhere else to align their chakras. But I didn't, because I was still operating under the delusion that this was temporary, that things would get better, and that maybe I was overreacting to what were just personality conflicts. I was about to learn exactly how wrong I was. You know that moment in every action movie where the hero finally snaps? Usually it happens after about 90 minutes of watching him get beaten down, humiliated, and pushed around until something inside him just breaks. And not in a bad way, but in a now I'm going to burn this whole thing to the ground way. Well, my moment came on a Tuesday, after pulling a 12-hour shift at the warehouse because Jimmy called in sick with what he claimed was food poisoning, but was probably just a hangover from Monday Night Football. I was beat. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes you question why humans ever evolved past the stage where we just grunted at each other and ate berries. All I wanted was to come home, grab a beer, maybe catch some mindless TV, and eat whatever miracle mom had cooked up in the kitchen. Simple pleasures for a simple man, right? Wrong. So incredibly, stupidly wrong. I walked through the front door and immediately knew something was off. The house had that weird, tense energy you get after a fight, like the air itself was holding its breath. I could hear Alina and her sisters upstairs, their voices muffled but animated, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter that had an edge to it, like hyenas celebrating a fresh kill. "Mom?" I called out, dropping my keys on the table where Dad's wedding photo used to sit. No answer. "Mom, you here?" I checked the kitchen first. Empty, but there were signs she'd been cooking. A pot of what looked like beef stew sat on the stove, still warm, and there were fresh rolls cooling on the counter. The woman was like a culinary fairy godmother, I swear. But where the hell was she? That's when I heard it, a faint sound coming from downstairs. At first I thought maybe the water heater was acting up again, making those weird gurgling noises that always made me think our house was slowly dying from the inside. But as I got closer to the basement door, I realized it wasn't mechanical. It was crying. Soft, muffled sobs that made my chest tighten like someone was slowly turning a vice around my ribcage. I took the basement stairs two at a time, my work boots echoing in the concrete stairwell, and what I saw when I reached the bottom made my blood turn to liquid fire. My mother was sitting on a bare mattress on the cold basement floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes and black garbage bags stuffed with her belongings. Her rocking chair, the one Dad had bought her when I was born, the one she'd nursed me in when I was sick, the one she'd sit in every evening reading her romance novels, was shoved in the corner like discarded furniture. Her framed photos, her books, her little ceramic angels that Dad used to tease her about, all of it crammed into boxes like she was some kind of refugee in her own son's house. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and I swear to God, if you could bottle heartbreak and serve it as a drink, it would look exactly like my mother's face in that moment. Her eyes were red and puffy, her gray hair was messed up like she'd been pulling at it, and she was clutching one of Dad's old flannel shirts like it was a lifeline. "Hey, honey," she said, trying to smile through her tears like she was greeting me at the front door instead of sitting in a basement that looked like a storage unit. How was work? How was work? Jesus Christ. My mother had been banished to the basement like some kind of family secret, and she was asking me about my day. "Mom," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "What the hell is this? Why are you down here?" She looked away, suddenly very interested in smoothing down the wrinkles in Dad's shirt. "Oh, well, the girls needed the upstairs rooms. Talia said the basement would be better for what did she call it? My emotional processing. Something about negative energy affecting her creativity. Negative energy. My mother, grieving the loss of her husband, was apparently giving off negative energy that was interfering with Talia's ability to make vision boards and write poetry about her feelings. And Bianca? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. She said she needed the room with the good lighting for her video calls with her lawyer. You know, for the divorce proceedings. Mom wiped her nose with a tissue that looked like it had seen better days. "I didn't want to cause any trouble, Jordan. They said it would just be temporary, until they get things sorted out." Temporary. That word was starting to taste like poison in my mouth. I looked around the basement, really looked at it. The concrete walls were damp in places, the ceiling was low enough that I had to duck under the water pipes, and there was a musty smell that no amount of air freshener was going to fix. This wasn't a bedroom. This wasn't even suitable for storing Christmas decorations, let alone housing a human being. "Did they ask you?" I said, and I could feel my jaw clenching so tight I was probably going to need dental work. "Did anyone bother to ask you if this was okay?" Mom's laugh was bitter, and hearing that sound come out of my sweet, patient mother was like watching Mr. Rogers drop the F-bomb. "Ask me? Oh, honey, they didn't ask. They told." Bianca said upstairs was prime real estate, and Talia said she could feel my grief through the walls, and it was affecting her chakras. "They moved my things while you were at work. I came home from the grocery store and found everything down here. They moved her while I was at work. Like she was a piece of furniture they were rearranging. Like she didn't matter. Like she was some kind of burden they were doing a favor by tolerating. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a guitar string that's been wound too tight, making a sound so sharp and final you know it's never going back to the way it was. I stood up, my head nearly hitting the low ceiling, and for the first time in months, I felt completely, crystal clear certain about something. Pack your bags, Mom. She looked up at me with confusion written all over her face. What? Pack your bags. We're leaving. Jordan, honey, you can't just. Watch me, I said, and I meant every word. Pack whatever you need for tonight. We'll come back for the rest later. For the first time since Dad died, I saw something flicker in my mother's eyes that looked like hope. And for the first time since Alina's sisters moved in, I felt like myself again. It was time to remind everyone in this house that respect isn't optional and family doesn't mean doormat. There's something liberating about the moment you stop giving a damn about keeping the peace. It's like finally taking off shoes that have been pinching your feet for hours. Suddenly you remember what it feels like to walk without pain. As I climbed those basement stairs, leaving Mom to pack her essentials, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy, exactly, but focused. Like a laser beam cutting through all the bullshit excuses and fake politeness that had been suffocating our house. The sound of laughter was getting louder as I reached the top of the stairs. Real belly laughs. The kind you hear at girls' night out when someone's telling a story about their latest dating disaster. It was coming from the living room, my living room, where my father's wedding photo used to sit, where my mother used to read her books in the evening, where I used to actually feel like I lived instead of just existing as a walking ATM for other people's problems. I found all three of them sprawled across the couch like they owned the place, which I guess they figured they did at this point. Bianca was painting her nails some shade of red that probably had a ridiculous name like Revenge Fantasy or Ex-Husband's Blood. Talia was doing some kind of yoga pose that looked more like she was trying to become a human pretzel, and Alina was scrolling through her phone with that vacant expression people get when they're deep in a social media rabbit hole. They looked so comfortable, so settled, so completely oblivious to the fact that they'd just crossed a line that had a big neon sign saying Point of No Return planted right next to it. Hey babe, Alina said without looking up from her phone. How was work? Your mom made stew, but I think it's a little too salty. Maybe you could talk to her about cutting back on the sodium? Talk to her about cutting back on the sodium. My mother, who was currently sitting in a basement that looked like a storage unit, surrounded by garbage bags full of her life, and my wife wanted me to give her cooking tips. Where's Mom? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I wanted to hear them say it. I wanted to watch them try to justify what they'd done. Oh, she's downstairs, Talia said, not even pausing in her pretzel routine. We had to make some adjustments to the living situation. The energy upstairs was getting really heavy with all that grief floating around. It was affecting my creative flow, and Bianca needs the good lighting for her Zoom calls. Affecting her creative flow. I looked around the living room and saw Talia's sacred creative space had expanded like some kind of new age cancer. Crystals on every surface, essential oil diffusers pumping out enough lavender scent to knock out a horse, and vision boards covering half the wall where family photos used to hang. The place looked like a yoga studio had mated with a head shop and produced the world's most annoying offspring. Really? I said, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. You moved my 63-year-old mother to the basement so you could have better lighting for your divorce calls and clearer chakras for your art projects? Bianca finally looked up from her nails, and I could see the exact moment she realized that something in my tone didn't match the Jordan she was used to, the one who nodded and smiled and went along with whatever made everyone else happy. It's not like that, she said, waving her hand dismissively and nearly smudging her fresh manicure. It's just temporary, until I get my settlement from Derek. And the basement isn't that bad. It's cooler down there, which is probably better for someone her age anyway. Better for someone her age. Like my mother was a piece of produce that needed specific storage conditions. Plus, Talia chimed in, finally untangling herself from whatever yoga pose she'd been attempting. She said she didn't mind. She's very understanding about the importance of maintaining positive energy in shared living spaces. She said she didn't mind. Right. Because what was she going to say? That she minded being treated like a second-class citizen in her own son's house? That she minded having her dead husband's memory erased to make room for vision boards and ring lights? My mother would eat glass before she'd complain about anything that might cause family drama. How considerate of her, I said. And Alina finally looked up from her phone, probably picking up on something in my voice that her sisters had missed. Jordan, what's wrong? She asked, and she actually had the nerve to look concerned. You seem upset. Upset. Like I'd stubbed my toe or gotten a parking ticket, instead of discovering that my wife had participated in banishing my grieving mother to the basement without so much as a heads up. You know what's wrong? I said, and I could feel that laser focus getting sharper. You made a decision about my mother without talking to me. You moved her to the basement like she's some kind of inconvenience you needed to store out of sight. We didn't move her anywhere, Alina said, and I had to admire the audacity it took to say that with a straight face. We simply reorganized the space allocation to better meet everyone's needs. Space allocation. Jesus Christ, she was talking about my mother like she was a filing cabinet. Her needs? I asked. What about her needs? Did anyone ask what she needed? She needs to process her grief, Talia said with the kind of condescending tone people use when they think they're being wise. And sometimes that's easier when you're not surrounded by reminders of happier times. The basement is more conducive to inner reflection. You know what? I said, and I could feel myself getting to the point where diplomacy was about to take a flying leap out the window. You're absolutely right. She does need to process her grief, and she needs to do it somewhere she's actually wanted. The three of them exchanged glances, and I could practically see the wheels turning as they tried to figure out if I was bluffing. What's that supposed to mean? Bianca asked. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and tried to remember when exactly she turned into someone I didn't recognize. When had the woman I married become someone who could smile while participating in the systematic humiliation of a grieving widow? It means, I said, and my voice was steady as a rock, that Mom and I are leaving. Tonight. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. All three of them stared at me like I'd just announced I was joining the circus or running for president. You're being ridiculous, Alina said finally. You can't just leave over a room assignment. Watch me, I said. And for the record, this isn't about a room. This is about respect. And the fact that you three wouldn't recognize it if it walked up and introduced itself. Nobody saw it coming. But then again, nobody had been paying attention to anything except their own convenience. Here's what I learned about revenge that night. The best kind doesn't involve screaming, throwing things, or making dramatic exits that slam doors and leave everybody talking about your emotional breakdown for weeks. No, the best revenge is surgical. It's precise. It's the kind that happens so quietly and efficiently that by the time people realize what hit them, you're already 3 moves ahead, sitting in a better place, sipping coffee, and wondering why you didn't make these changes years ago. The thing about being the calm one in every crisis is that people start to think you don't have a breaking point. They figure you'll just keep absorbing whatever garbage they throw at you, because that's what you've always done. It's like being the designated driver of life. Everyone assumes you're fine with it because you've never complained, but eventually, even the most patient person gets tired of cleaning up other people's messes while they stumble around making more. After I dropped that bomb about leaving, Alina and her sisters spent the rest of the evening in damage control mode. Suddenly, everyone was very concerned about my feelings and very eager to find a compromise that would make everyone happy. Bianca offered to give up the room with the good lighting. Talia suggested we could rotate the upstairs bedrooms on a weekly basis, like we were running some kind of twisted timeshare program. Alina kept saying we should talk this through like adults and find a solution that works for everyone. But here's the thing. I was done talking, done compromising, done pretending that there was some magical middle ground where my mother's dignity could coexist with their selfishness. Some lines, once crossed, don't get uncrossed with apologies and promises to do better. I didn't argue with them. I didn't explain myself. I just nodded and said we'd figure it out in the morning, then went downstairs to help Mom pack the rest of her things. We worked in companionable silence, folding her clothes and wrapping her ceramic angels in old newspapers like we were preparing for a move we'd been planning for months instead of a midnight escape from our own house. Are you sure about this, honey? She asked as I carefully packed Dad's old fishing tackle box. I don't want to cause problems in your marriage. Mom, I said, looking her straight in the eye. My marriage has problems, but you're not one of them. You're the solution. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Not because I was actually sick, but because I had business to take care of, and some things are more important than loading boxes for 8 hours and pretending everything's fine. First stop, Desmond's house. Desmond was my buddy from work, one of those guys who'd give you the shirt off his back and then ask if you needed pants to go with it. I'd mentioned Mom's situation to him a few weeks back, and he'd immediately offered his guest room if we ever needed it. At the time, I'd brushed it off, thinking we'd never get to that point. Shows you how much I knew about anything. Jordan, his wife Maria practically shouted when she opened the door. And you must be Gloria? Desmond told me all about you. Come in, come in. I just made coffee. Within an hour, Mom was settled in their cozy guest room, which had actual windows that let in actual sunlight, and Maria was showing her the little garden where she could sit and read in the mornings. Watching my mother smile, really smile, for the first time in weeks was like watching someone take their first breath after nearly drowning. But I wasn't done. Not even close. While Mom got acquainted with her temporary sanctuary, I drove across town to Henderson Real Estate, where a woman named Patricia Henderson listened to my requirements with the focused attention of someone who understood that time was money and I had very specific needs. 2 bedrooms, I told her. Safe neighborhood. Close to public transportation. Move-in ready. Budget? She asked, fingers already flying across her keyboard. Not an issue, I said, which was true. While Alina had been focused on making room for her sisters and their various emotional needs, I'd been quietly building a solid savings account. Funny how much money you can accumulate when you're not spending it on someone else's retail therapy and organic chakra balancing supplements. By noon, Patricia was driving me to a condo complex about 20 minutes from our house. The building was brick and well-maintained, with actual landscaping that didn't look like it was maintained by someone's cousin who owned a weed whacker. The unit was on the 2nd floor, with a view of a small park where kids played on swings and old people fed ducks from benches. It's perfect, I said before we'd even finished the tour. The kitchen was small but functional. The living room had enough space for Mom's rocking chair and a decent-sized TV, and the 2nd bedroom would make a great office where I could finally set up the computer desk I'd been meaning to buy for years. Don't you want to think about it? Patricia asked. Maybe discuss it with your family? Nope, I said, pulling out my checkbook. How fast can we make this happen? Turns out, when you have good credit, stable employment, and enough money for first month's rent plus security deposit, things can happen very fast indeed. By 3 o'clock, I was signing papers. By 4, I had keys. By 5, I was standing in our empty new living room, calling Mom to tell her we had a place to call home. The whole time, my phone was buzzing with increasingly frantic texts from Alina. First came the anger. Are you seriously doing this over a misunderstanding? Then the bargaining. We can work this out if you just come home and talk. Then the guilt trips. You're destroying our marriage over your mother. And finally, the panic. Please don't make any decisions you'll regret. But here's the thing about regret. I'd been regretting my inaction for months. Regretting every time I let something slide that shouldn't have slid. Regretting every moment I chose peace over principle. What I was doing now didn't feel like something I'd regret. It felt like something I should have done a long time ago. That evening, I picked Mom up from Desmond's house and drove her to our new place. We ordered pizza from a place down the street and ate it sitting on the floor of our empty living room, making plans for furniture shopping and talking about what color to paint the walls. Thank you, she said as we sat there surrounded by boxes and possibility. For what? For choosing me, she said simply. And that's when I knew I'd made the right choice. Not just for her, but for me. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't staying and fighting. It's knowing when to walk away. You know what's funny about nuclear bombs? They're surprisingly quiet right before they detonate. No dramatic countdown, no ominous music, just a moment of perfect silence before everything you thought you knew about the world gets rearranged in ways that would make a tornado jealous. That's exactly what Sunday morning felt like as I sat at the kitchen table in our new condo, writing what would probably be the most important letter of my life. Mom was in the living room, humming while she arranged her ceramic angels on the windowsill. The same windowsill that actually got sunlight, unlike certain basements I could mention. The sound of her being genuinely content was better than any music I'd ever heard. For the first time in months, she wasn't walking around like she was apologizing for existing. and that alone was worth whatever chaos was about to rain down on my marriage. I'd been thinking about this letter all week, ever since I signed the lease and realized there was no going back. Part of me wanted to just ghost the whole situation, pack up, disappear, and let Alina figure out what happened when she finally noticed I wasn't coming home. But that felt cowardly, and despite everything that had happened, I wasn't a coward. I was just a guy who'd finally remembered he had a spine. The envelope was sitting on the table in front of me, thick and official looking because I'd decided to do this thing properly. No hastily scribbled notes or emotional outbursts. This was going to be clean, clear, and absolutely devastating in its simplicity. Inside were 3 documents that told the whole story better than any angry speech ever could. First, a copy of the signed lease agreement for our new place, with a little yellow sticky note that said, "Mom and I will be out of your way." I'd agonized over that note for about 10 minutes before deciding that sometimes understatement was the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. Let them read between the lines. Let them figure out that out of your way meant permanently gone from your lives unless you figure out how to act like decent human beings. Second, bank statements showing that I'd quietly moved my savings, all of it, into a private account that had my name and my name only on it. This wasn't some vindictive financial attack. It was just me taking back control of money I'd earned with my own sweat and blood. Funny how much cash you accumulate when you're not funding someone else's vision boards and divorce attorney fees. The statements were highlighted in yellow to make sure nobody missed the important parts, like the final balance that would make their eyes water. Third, a notice of separation that I'd had a lawyer draw up. Nothing fancy, just a simple document that laid out the basic facts. Irreconcilable differences, no contest, clean split. I wasn't asking for anything except my freedom and my dignity back. She could keep the house, the furniture, and her precious sisters. I just wanted out. The drive to the house felt like going to a funeral. Appropriate, since I was essentially burying the man I used to be, the one who thought keeping everyone else happy was more important than keeping himself sane. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a minute, looking at the place that used to feel like home and now just looked like a building where I'd wasted too many years pretending everything was fine. I could hear voices from inside as I walked up to the front door, Alina and her sisters, probably planning their next round of home improvements now that they had the run of the place. The sound of their laughter made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about clarity. I walked in without knocking. It was still technically my house for a few more legal minutes, and found all 3 of them in the kitchen, sitting around the table like they were planning a book club meeting. Bianca was scrolling through apartment listings on her laptop, Talia was sketching something that looked like a floor plan, and Alina was making notes on a legal pad. They looked so focused, so determined, so completely convinced that they could just reorganize the world to suit their needs. "Ladies," I said, and they all looked up with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance that I'd interrupted their planning session. "Jordan," Alina said, jumping up like she was greeting a long-lost relative instead of the husband she'd helped drive out of his own home. "I was just about to call you. We've been talking, and we think we can make some adjustments." "Save it," I said, pulling the envelope out of my jacket pocket. "I've got something for you." I set it down on the table between them like I was dealing cards in the world's most serious poker game. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming and what sounded like a leaf blower 3 houses down. "What's this?" Alina asked, though something in her voice suggested she already knew this wasn't going to be good news. "Open it," I said. "All of it. Read it carefully." Watching them go through those documents was like watching someone slowly realize they'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. First came confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of dawning horror as the reality of the situation settled in like concrete. Bianca was the first to speak. "You bought a condo? Without telling us." "I did," I said. "Nice place. 2 bedrooms, good lighting, positive energy. Mom loves it." "You can't just leave," Talia said, waving the separation papers like they were on fire. "This is crazy. You're having some kind of breakdown." I almost laughed at that. A breakdown. Right. Because standing up for yourself and making rational decisions based on how people actually treat you is clearly a sign of mental instability. "I'm not having a breakdown," I said. "I'm having a breakthrough. Big difference." Alina was staring at the bank statements like they were written in a foreign language. You moved all our money? I moved my money, I corrected. The money I earned. The money that was keeping this little commune of yours afloat while you and your sisters played house. Jordan, please, she said. And for the first time since this whole mess started, she actually looked scared. We can fix this. We made mistakes, but we can work it out. You made a choice, I said, and I kept my voice level because losing my temper now would undermine everything I was trying to accomplish. You chose them over me. You chose their comfort over my mother's dignity. You chose to make decisions about my family without including me in the conversation. That's not fair. Fair. I interrupted. Was it fair when you moved my grieving mother to the basement so your sister could have better lighting for her divorce calls? Was it fair when you erased my father's memory to make room for vision boards and chakra crystals? The look on her face told me she was finally starting to understand that this wasn't a negotiation or a fight she could win with the right combination of tears and promises. This was a done deal, signed and sealed and delivered with the kind of finality that doesn't leave room for appeals. So that's it, she said. You're throwing away 8 years of marriage over a room? No, I said, picking up the empty envelope and folding it neatly. I'm ending 8 years of taking the path of least resistance. 8 years of choosing peace over principles. 8 years of letting other people decide what my life should look like. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back one more time. Oh, and Alina, you might want to start looking for jobs. All 3 of you. Turns out maintaining a household is expensive when you actually have to pay for it yourself. The silence I left behind was sweeter than any goodbye I could have written. You know that scene in disaster movies where the asteroid hits, and there's this moment of eerie calm before the shockwaves start tearing everything apart? That's exactly what the next few weeks felt like, except instead of an asteroid, I dropped a truth bomb on my old life. And instead of buildings collapsing, I got to watch 3 grown women discover what the real world actually costs when someone isn't subsidizing their delusions of grandeur. Moving out that Sunday evening was like watching a master class in how to pack a life efficiently. Mom and I had gotten pretty good at the whole emergency relocation thing, and this time we had the luxury of knowing exactly where we were going and why. No tears, no drama, no last-minute attempts to guilt trip us into staying. Just 2 people who'd finally figured out the difference between a house and a home, loading boxes into my truck while the sun set on what was probably the best decision I'd made in years. The condo welcomed us like it had been waiting for us all along. Maria, Desmond's wife, had apparently spent the week shopping for what she called essential housewarming supplies, which translated to enough food to feed a small army, and about 17 different varieties of tea because she decided Mom was obviously a tea person. She wasn't wrong. Within 3 days, Mom had claimed the sunny corner of the kitchen as her personal tea station, complete with a little collection of mugs that actually matched instead of random promotional cups from various hardware stores. This feels right, Mom said on our first Wednesday morning, sitting by the window with her coffee and watching kids walk to school in the park across the street. Like we're supposed to be here. And damn if she wasn't right. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking around with that constant low-level tension that comes from living in a house where you're always waiting for the next crisis or complaint. No more tiptoeing around other people's moods. No more pretending that selfish behavior was somehow noble if you called it self-care and lit enough scented candles around it. Meanwhile, the reports from the old house were coming in through Desmond, whose wife had a direct pipeline to the neighborhood gossip network that would make the CIA jealous. Apparently, the Sisterhood of Entitlement was discovering some harsh realities about adult life that nobody had bothered to explain to them during their extended vacation from responsibility. First casualty, Bianca's financial situation, which turned out to be even more spectacular than I'd imagined. Turns out Derek wasn't just divorcing her. He was divorcing her with the kind of thoroughness that suggested he'd been planning this exit strategy for a while. All those joint accounts she'd been counting on, frozen tighter than a Minnesota lake in January. Her lawyer, the one who supposedly needed that upstairs room with the good lighting for their crucial video calls? Yeah, he'd fired her as a client when her retainer check bounced harder than a rubber ball on concrete. She's been calling Derek every day, Maria reported during one of her visits, because apparently being the neighborhood news anchor was her calling in life. Screaming about how he can't just leave her with nothing. But word is, he's got documentation of every penny she spent on those shopping sprees and spa days while he was working 60-hour weeks. Her lawyer told her she's lucky if she gets the car. The car being a 3-year-old Honda Civic that Derek had bought her for Christmas. Not exactly the luxury lifestyle maintenance vehicle she'd been hoping to leverage in the settlement. But Bianca's financial implosion was nothing compared to Talia's complete failure to launch into anything resembling functional adulthood. Remember all that talk about finding her purpose and aligning her chakras with her career goals? Turns out the universe wasn't particularly interested in paying her to make vision boards and write poetry about her feelings. She's walked out of 3 job interviews, Desmond told me during one of our lunch breaks at work. Maria heard it from Janet, who heard it from the woman at the grocery store whose daughter works at that marketing firm downtown. Apparently, Talia asked if the dress code would accommodate her need to wear crystals for spiritual protection, then got offended when they suggested she might want to tone down the patchouli oil for client meetings. I almost choked on my sandwich. She didn't. Oh, she did. Then she told them their corporate energy was toxic and walked out mid-interview. The other 2 places, she showed up late because she said Mercury was in retrograde and it was affecting her transportation chakra. Transportation chakra. Jesus Christ. No wonder she couldn't hold down a job at a coffee shop. But the real kicker, the cherry on top of this whole karma sundae, was what was happening to their domestic situation now that they didn't have a live-in cook and cleaning service masquerading as my mother. The place is falling apart, Maria reported with the kind of glee that only comes from watching people get exactly what they deserve. Nobody knows how to do laundry properly, so everything's either shrunk or turned pink. They've been living on takeout and frozen dinners. But that's getting expensive fast now that nobody's contributing to the grocery budget. And apparently, the house smells like a combination of dirty dishes and whatever essential oil Talia's been burning to cleanse the negative energy from your departure. The negative energy from my departure. I love that. Apparently, even my absence was somehow problematic for Talia's spiritual well-being. They've been fighting, Maria continued, settling in for what was clearly her favorite part of the story. Bianca's mad because Talia won't help with cleaning. Talia's mad because Bianca's bringing divorce energy into her creative space. And Alina's mad because she's suddenly responsible for everything and discovering that maintaining a household is actual work. Actual work. What a concept. The best part was that none of them seemed to have figured out the obvious solution to their problems. Nobody had suggested that maybe, just maybe, they could apologize for treating my mother like garbage and ask us to come back. Nobody had acknowledged that their behavior had been anything less than perfectly reasonable. They were all just sitting in that house, pointing fingers at each other and wondering why life had suddenly gotten so difficult. It would have been pathetic if it wasn't so satisfying. Do you miss any of it? Mom asked me one evening as we sat on our little balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink that were way better than any mood lighting Talia could have engineered with her crystals and essential oils. The house, I said. The marriage? The constant walking on eggshells? Any of it, she said simply. I thought about it for a minute, really thought about it. Did I miss anything about my old life? The bigger kitchen? The yard I never had time to enjoy? The illusion that I was part of a happy family instead of just a paycheck with legs? No, I said, and realized I meant it completely. I don't miss any of it. Do you? Mom smiled, the first completely genuine smile I'd seen from her since Dad died. Not for a second. And that's when I knew we'd both made it to the other side. 3 weeks into our new life, I was sitting in my home office, my actual home office, not some corner I'd carved out between other people's drama, when my phone rang. The caller ID made me do a double take. Alina. Not a text, not a passive-aggressive message through mutual friends, but an actual phone call. In all the chaos of the past month, this was the first time she'd tried to reach me directly. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity, maybe the hope that she'd finally figured out what she'd done wrong. Probably just morbid fascination with whatever fresh hell was about to come through my phone speaker. Jordan. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, like she'd been deflated. No trace of the confident woman who'd rearranged my life to accommodate her sister's needs without bothering to ask my opinion. Yeah, it's me. Can we meet? Just to talk. The old me would have jumped at the chance, desperate to fix things and get back to the familiar dysfunction I'd mistaken for normal. But the new me, the guy who'd learned the difference between keeping the peace and keeping his dignity, wasn't in any hurry to revisit the scene of the crime. What's there to talk about, Alina? She was quiet for so long, I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then I heard something that stopped me cold. She was crying. Not the dramatic, manipulative tears I'd seen during our last fight, but the kind of quiet, broken sobs that come from someone who's finally hit rock bottom and realized they're the one who dug the hole. I fucked up, she said, and hearing her curse was almost as shocking as hearing her cry. Alina never swore, claimed it was unladylike and beneath her. I fucked up so bad, Jordan. Everything's falling apart, and I finally figured out why. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing to meet her at Murphy's Cafe, the little place downtown where we'd had our first date 8 years ago. Neutral territory, public space, witnesses in case things went sideways. I wasn't taking any chances. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth looking like she'd aged about 5 years in the past month. Her hair wasn't perfect, her makeup looked like an afterthought, and she was wearing a plain sweater instead of one of those designer outfits she usually favored. This wasn't the polished, put-together woman I'd married. This was someone who'd been through the ringer and come out the other side with all the glossy finish stripped away. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." I almost didn't. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left. About what happened, about how we got here, about what I did to your mom. And I'm ashamed." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been practicing them. "I'm ashamed of how I treated her. I'm ashamed of how I let my sisters treat her. I'm ashamed that I was so worried about keeping Bianca and Talia happy that I forgot about the person who actually deserved our care. It was a good start, but I'd heard apologies before." "Go on." She was grieving. "Jordan, your dad had just died, and instead of helping her through it, we made her feel like a burden. We moved her to the basement like she was something to be hidden away. We erased your father's memory from the house like it didn't matter. We took someone who was already broken and broke her more." She was crying harder now, and part of me, the part that had loved this woman for 8 years, wanted to reach across the table and comfort her. But the bigger part, the part that had learned about self-respect, stayed exactly where it was. "Why, Alina? Help me understand how you thought any of that was okay." She wiped her nose with a napkin, leaving a smear of mascara on the white paper. "Because I was selfish. Because I wanted to be the good sister, the one who swooped in to save the day. Because I thought if I could just fix their problems, everything would work out perfectly. At my mother's expense." "At your mother's expense," she agreed. "And yours. And ours. I chose them over my own family, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until it was too late." "What changed your mind?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Reality. Bianca's divorce settlement came through. Derek got almost everything because she'd been spending their money like a teenager with a trust fund. She can't afford her own place, can't get a job that pays enough to support her lifestyle, and she's become this bitter, angry person who blames everyone else for her problems." "And Talia?" Talia's living in a fantasy world where the universe owes her a living because she's special. She's been through 6 jobs in 2 months, either quitting because they don't appreciate her unique energy or getting fired for showing up late or not showing up at all. Yesterday, she told me she's thinking about starting a crystal healing business, which would be great except she has no money, no business plan, and no actual skills. I could have said something about how I'd seen this coming from a mile away, but I didn't. There was no satisfaction in being right about something that had cost us both so much. "They're not bad people," she continued, "but they're lost, and I thought I could save them, but all I did was enable them. And in the process, I destroyed the best thing in my life." "Your mom called me last week," she said suddenly. "Asked how you were doing." "Mom called you. She's worried about you. About us. She said she never wanted to be the reason our marriage ended." That sounded exactly like something my mother would say. Taking responsibility for other people's choices, worrying about everyone else's happiness while her own got pushed aside. "She's not the reason," I said firmly. "Your choices are the reason. The way you treated her is the reason." "I know." Alina looked down at her hands, which were wrapped around a coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jordan. Not just because everything fell apart, but because I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Because I hurt you." Because I became someone I don't recognize. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The weight of 8 years hanging between us like a curtain neither of us knew how to pull back. What do you want, Alina? I asked finally. What do you want from this conversation? I want to fix this, she said, looking up at me with hope in her eyes that I recognized from our early days together. I want us to fix this. I'll make it right with your mom. I'll set boundaries with my sisters. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. And there it was, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The moment when I had to decide if love was enough to overcome everything that had happened, if good intentions could erase bad choices, if two people could rebuild something that had been torn down to its foundation. I looked at this woman I'd loved for 8 years, this person who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my hopes for the future, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not love, not even sadness. Just a kind of peaceful certainty that some things, once broken, stay broken no matter how much you want to fix them. It's too late, I said, and the words felt like a relief instead of a loss. I'm sorry, Alina, but it's too late. Please, she whispered. I know I messed up, but people make mistakes. People change. I can change. Maybe you can, I said, standing up and pulling my wallet out to leave money for my untouched coffee. But I already have. And the person I am now doesn't want to go back to who we were. I walked away from that cafe, from that conversation, from the last 8 years of my life, and I didn't look back. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. The drive home to the condo, to our real home, felt like the final page of a book I'd been trying to finish for years. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming while she made dinner, and the sight of her being genuinely happy was worth more than all the second chances in the world. How did it go? She asked, not looking up from whatever she was stirring on the stove. It went exactly the way it needed to, I said, and meant every word. 6 months later, I was sitting on our balcony watching Mom teach Desmond's 5-year-old daughter how to braid friendship bracelets, and I realized something that would have seemed impossible during those dark basement days. We'd built something better than what we'd lost. The condo had transformed from a temporary escape plan into an actual home. Mom's ceramic angels caught the morning light on the windowsill. My computer desk finally had a proper setup in the second bedroom, and the kitchen smelled like whatever miracle she was cooking up for dinner. But more than that, the whole place had this energy, peaceful, content, drama-free, that I'd forgotten was possible. Mom had joined a book club at the community center, where she'd become the unofficial cookie supplier and designated voice of reason when discussions about romance novels got too heated. She'd started wearing brighter colors again, smiling without that careful hesitation she'd developed after Dad died, and I'd even caught her laughing at sitcom reruns instead of just staring sadly at the TV. You know what I realized today? She said as little Emma carefully tied off another bracelet. I haven't felt like I was in anyone's way for months. That hit me harder than it should have, because that's exactly what those 3 women had made her feel like, an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be solved by shoving her somewhere out of sight. Now she was exactly where she belonged, in a place where her presence was appreciated, not tolerated. Good, I said, taking a sip of my beer and watching Emma show off her finished bracelet. Because you're not in anyone's way. You never were. Desmond and Maria came by every Sunday for dinner, bringing Emma and whatever neighborhood gossip Maria had collected during the week. The reports from my old house had become less frequent but more entertaining. Apparently, Alina had moved back in with her parents after the sisters finally managed to destroy the place completely. Last I heard, Bianca was working at a department store and still bitter about her divorce settlement, while Talia had started some kind of online crystal business that was about as successful as you'd expect. I didn't feel bad for them. Not anymore. Some people have to learn the hard way that actions have consequences, and I was just grateful I wasn't around to cushion their fall. What are you thinking about? Mom asked, noticing my contemplative mood. Just this, I said, gesturing around our little balcony kingdom. How different everything is now. Better different or worse different. I looked at her, really looked at her. Sitting there in the evening light, helping a kid make jewelry while dinner cooked in our kitchen, and I didn't have to worry about coming home to some fresh drama or passive-aggressive nonsense. Definitely better, I said. Even without Alina? It was a fair question. 6 months ago, I'd thought my life was over when my marriage imploded. Now I couldn't imagine going back to that house. That stress, that constant feeling of walking on eggshells around people who saw kindness as weakness. Especially without Alina, I said. I spent 8 years trying to keep everyone else happy and forgot what it felt like to be happy myself. Mom reached over and patted my hand. The same gesture she'd used when I was a kid and needed reassurance that everything would be okay. Thank you, she said quietly, for choosing me, for choosing us. Best decision I ever made, I said, and meant every word. As the sun set over our little corner of the world, I realized something that probably should have been obvious from the beginning. Family isn't about blood or marriage certificates or whose name is on the mortgage. It's about respect, loyalty, and choosing to show up for the people who matter. We don't always get to choose our family, but we can choose where we belong. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can say isn't, "I'm sorry," or "let's work it out." Sometimes, the strongest thing you can say is, "Pack your bags. We're going somewhere better." And we did.